At the packed campaign fundraiser, Brenda, her eyes bright with ambition, laughed right through me. Dale's work, she announced to the table, dismissing my latest bust as just chasing small-time thugs, a necessary but unglamorous chore. My badge felt heavy, a cheap trinket. Some of us, she added, turning back to the influential cluster, are building a future. The front door clicked shut behind me, the sound deadened by the late hour. My shoulders ached, a dull throb that had been building since the arrest of Leo Murphy's last associate. 23 hours awake, a dozen interviews, and the satisfying clang of a cell door. It was done. The apartment was mostly dark, but a sliver of light spilled from the living room, a soft hum audible. Brenda was still up, of course. She sat on the sofa, tablet glowing on her lap, a half-empty mug of herbal tea beside her. Her fingers danced across the screen, her voice a low murmur, sharp and decisive, as she discussed campaign strategy with someone on a video call. She didn't look up immediately. I loosened my tie, pulling the knot down, feeling the pressure ease from my neck. The air in here was different from the stale, smoke-tinged scent of the station house. It smelled of citrus and ambition. Dale, she acknowledged finally, her eyes still on the screen, a polite nod. Her call ended a moment later, and she placed the tablet face down, a faint glow still emanating from its edges. Rough night? Rough week, I corrected, slumping onto the armchair opposite her, the leather sighing under my weight. Murphy's entire operation is boxed. Took longer than expected, but it's clean. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, adjusting a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Right, another win for the good guys, keeping the peace. Her tone was level, but it held a dismissive edge. Maintaining the status quo. Important, I suppose. She picked up her tea, blew gently across the surface. But it's not really moving things, is it? Not like Grant's vision for the city. That's what changes lives. Grant Cooper, her candidate for mayor, and increasingly her entire world. Brenda was campaign manager, strategist, and by her own account, a rising star in local politics. She talked about tax reforms, infrastructure projects, community outreach programs. Grant's polling numbers are through the roof, she said, a smile playing on her lips. And the Westland Development endorsement, that's huge. It's opening doors, Dale. Big doors. For both of us, if you're willing to step through. She leaned forward, her expression serious. This is our moment. My moment. And yours if you make it yours. Grant sees potential in you too. An experienced law enforcement figure, clean record. Imagine what we could do. Climb with me. Or, she paused, her eyes meeting mine, cool and unwavering. Or we find ourselves on very different paths, Dale. I'm not waiting around for small-time busts while history is being made. The words hung in the quiet living room, each one landing like a precise, calculated blow. Small-time busts. After everything. I felt the sting, not so much in my ears, but a cold tightening in my chest. The gap between us, which I'd sometimes felt as a minor inconvenience, now felt like a chasm. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a measure of whiskey, then another, the amber liquid swirling in the glass. The ice clinked. It was the only sound for a long minute. The next morning, the apartment felt too quiet. The bed beside me was empty, cool. A small, elegant note, folded neatly, lay on my pillow. Dale, early start. Donor breakfast. See you tonight. No kiss, no warm, lingering scent. Just the facts. Brenda's world moved at a different pace, a different rhythm. Her note was polite, efficient, like a campaign memo. I was finishing my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. Mitch Miller. Jensen, he said, his voice crackling with a familiar urgency. Captain Kelly wants us. Now, said it's hot. On my way, I grunted, already pulling on my jacket. Some things, at least, remained constant. Captain Kelly's office was small, windowless, smelling faintly of stale coffee and desperation. He sat behind his cluttered desk, Mitch and I facing him, two hard chairs squeaking under our weight. Kelly slid a file across the desk. It landed with a soft thud. City Hall, Kanoi, Kelly began, his gaze sharp, sweeping between us. Been some irregularities flagged. Procurement, specifically. Large contracts, no bid situations, cost overruns. Gary Peterson, the controller, brought it to us. He's jumpy, says it stinks. I picked up the file. Contracts? That's not exactly our usual beat, Captain. Sounds more like financial crimes, audit department work. Kelly leaned back, his chair groaning. Maybe, but Peterson specifically asked for a detective. Someone who knows how to talk to people, how to sniff out a rat, not just crunch numbers. And he trusts you, Jensen. You got a nose for following the money, even when it's trying its best to hide. He fixed me with a stare. Start at City Hall. Peterson's agreed to meet you off-site first. He'll call you with his location. He's spooked. Mitch, who'd been thumbing through the preliminary documents, pointed at a name near the bottom of a vendor list. Westland Development? Isn't that the outfit that just gave a huge donation to Grant Cooper's mayoral campaign? My stomach tightened, a familiar knot forming, cold and unwelcome. Westland, Brenda's huge endorsement. I hoped it was nothing. I knew better. Gary Peterson met us in a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like road grit. He was a small man, bald on top, with nervous eyes that darted around the room. He clutched a worn briefcase to his chest. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. They're cooking the books, Peterson whispered, leaning forward, his voice barely audible above the clatter of breakfast plates. Big contracts, millions, for things that don't add up. Fake invoices, phantom deliverables. It's all going to Westland Development, and nobody wants to look too closely because of who they're tied to. Gary Peterson's hands trembled as he laid out the documents on the sticky diner table. See here? Sierra Construction. Huge bid, almost $9 million, for the East Side Community Center renovation. Completely out of budget, but Commissioner Schmidt pushed it through, said it was urgent, a community imperative. Mitch and I leaned in, studying the photocopies. The Sierra Construction letterhead looked professional enough, but the address listed was a P.O. box in a strip mall known for mail forwarding services. And they got the contract? Mitch asked, his voice low. Peterson nodded, dabbing at his forehead with a napkin. Unanimous vote. Schmidt presented it as a done deal, practically. Said Sierra was the only firm that could meet the timeline. Funny, because no one had ever heard of them before. It took us 2 days working out of a small, cramped office at the station to confirm what Peterson suspected. Sierra Construction was a ghost, a name on paper, an empty office, a phone number that went straight to a generic voicemail. And it wasn't alone. We found 3 other shell companies, all with similar characteristics. P.O. box addresses, no visible operations, and suspiciously large city contracts pushed through in the last 6 months. Midwest Logistics, Summit Services, City Line Solutions, each one a phantom, each one awarded contracts with minimal scrutiny. The paper trail, thin as it was, eventually led us to a single holding company, Atlas Group Holdings. And Atlas Group Holdings, a quick search of corporate records showed, was a subsidiary of Westland Development, the same Westland Development that Mitch had flagged, the one making headlines for its generous contributions to Grant Cooper's campaign. Commissioner Schmidt, I murmured, running my finger over a copy of the contract approval. He's the common denominator. Yeah, Mitch confirmed, leaning back in his chair. Word on the street is Schmidt's a shoo-in for a cabinet position if Cooper wins. Something big, maybe head of public works, solidifying his future, you know. A growing unease settled in my gut. This wasn't just some back alley deal. This was reaching into the upper echelons of city government, weaving itself into the very fabric of a political campaign. Brenda's campaign. The thought was a cold seep. We spent the next week chasing the money. It was like trying to catch smoke. Payments from the city to Sierra Construction or Midwest Logistics would hit an account, sit there for a day or two, then be drained through a series of rapid, complex transfers. Offshore accounts, dummy corporations, multiple bank branches. It was a well-oiled machine, designed for speed and obfuscation. The money was gone, vanished, leaving behind only the digital echoes of its passage. No work was being done on the East Side Community Center, no materials ordered, no crews hired, just a paper transaction, a phantom project, and millions of taxpayer dollars disappearing into a financial black hole. During this time, Brenda became more of a phantom herself. Her calls were infrequent, always brief, always about logistics or fundraising targets. Are you sure about that guest list for the gala, Dale? We need the Cranstons there. They're critical for the last push. Or, I'll be home late again. We're finalizing the media buys. This next week is crucial. When she was home, she was often still on her tablet, still talking to donors, her focus unwavering. One evening I tried to tell her what we were finding. Brenda, this Westland development, they're tied to a lot of shady contracts. Shell companies, money disappearing. She waved a dismissive hand, not looking up from her tablet. Dale, please. Not now. We're so close. We can't have any negative optics. Westland is a major donor, a pillar of the business community. You need to be careful with these kinds of accusations. It could derail everything. She spoke as if my investigation was a personal slight, an inconvenience to her agenda. Her words were a familiar sting, reminding me again of the chasm opening between us. I started to see the pattern, clear as day. The contracts benefited Westland Development, which in turn benefited Grant Cooper's campaign. And the person pushing them through, Commissioner Schmidt, was a future ally. It was a perfectly designed system, hidden in plain sight. Mitch, always observant, caught my distraction. "You're quiet, Jensen," he remarked one afternoon, watching me stare blankly at a bank statement. "Something digging at you more than usual?" He didn't need to elaborate. We both knew how intertwined my life was with this campaign. We continued our interviews. Nervous city employees, lower-level bureaucrats, all spoke in hushed tones, carefully choosing their words. They hinted at pressure, at directives coming from above. "Things just started happening," one engineer mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Things we wouldn't normally approve." But the orders came down, from Commissioner Schmidt's office specifically. The scale of the corruption was beginning to dawn on me. This wasn't just a few crooked deals. This was an organized, sophisticated scheme, embedded within the machinery of the city, designed to funnel public money to a powerful development firm that was, in turn, bankrolling a mayoral candidate. And that candidate's campaign was being run by Brenda. The implications were immense, politically explosive. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I started to wonder, with a sickening lurch, how much Brenda truly knew about the people she was working with, the foundation upon which she was building her future. The warrant for Westland Development's financial records landed on Mr. Davies' desk like a brick. He grumbled, threatened legal action, but compliance was legally mandated. Mitch and I spent 2 full days sifting through ledgers, invoices, and bank statements in a cramped conference room, the smell of stale coffee mixing with the metallic tang of old paper. Hidden deep within a series of expense reports, amidst legitimate construction costs and payroll, we found a pattern of substantial recurring payments to a company called Capital Strategies Group. It was listed as a marketing and public relations consultant. Capital Strategies Group, Mitch read aloud, pointing at an entry. Sounds fancy. Let's see what they actually do. A quick search showed Capital Strategies Group was, in fact, a known political consulting firm. Not just any firm, but one heavily involved in local campaigns, and specifically one that had been hired by the Grant Cooper mayoral campaign. My breath hitched. Brenda had mentioned them once, dismissively, as just one of our outreach partners. Then, sifting through a box of campaign expenditure reports provided by the city clerk's office as part of the initial investigation, I found it, a signed contract between the Grant Cooper campaign and Capital Strategies Group. And below the campaign manager's name, Brenda's signature, authorized as deputy campaign lead, approving specific payments and deliverables. Her elegant, familiar script now stark against the official document. A cold dread settled in, deeper than before. My fiancé's name, linked directly to the very firm that was receiving payments from Westland Development, the firm that was, in turn, benefiting from the fraudulent city contracts. I tried to talk to her that evening. "Brenda, about Capital Strategies Group, what exactly do they do for the campaign?" She was packing a small overnight bag, her back to me. "Dale, it's standard stuff. Polling, messaging, outreach. You know, the usual campaign logistics." "Oui." Her tone was casual, too casual. They're showing up in some of Westland Development's records, I stated, keeping my voice even. Large payments, not clearly defined. She paused, her hand hovering over a folded blouse. Westland uses a lot of consultants, big company. It's probably just overlap, a vendor they both happen to use. It's nothing to do with us. It's common practice in the corporate world, Dale. Don't go looking for conspiracies where there aren't any. She didn't turn around. Her evasiveness was a wall. I felt the cold dread twist into something sharper. My fiancé's name was now appearing in my case files. Not just peripherally, but directly. The breakthrough came a few days later. A call to the tip line anonymous requesting a meet. We sat in a rented sedan in a deserted parking lot, rain drumming softly on the roof. The source was a man named Arthur Finch, a former accountant for Westland Development. He was thin, pale, his eyes darting nervously in the rearview mirror. "Mr. Davies," Finch began, his voice raspy, "he's dirty, always has been. The shell companies, Sierra Construction, all of them, they're just fronts. He'd funnel the city's money through them, then extract kickbacks. 20%, sometimes more." "Kickbacks to whom?" Mitch asked, leaning forward. Finch swallowed hard. "Key figures, people who could ensure the contracts went his way. City councilmen, department heads, people who could grease the wheels." My heart hammered against my ribs. "How high up does this go, Arthur?" I pressed, my voice barely a whisper. Finch looked at me, his gaze lingering for a moment, then shifted away. "Let's just say Mr. Davies is very invested in the future of this city, and in who's going to be sitting in the mayor's office next." Mitch gripped the steering wheel. "We need to confront Cooper. Right now, we have enough to bring him in." I shook my head. "Not yet. Finch is anonymous. We need hard proof, something that stands up in court. This could be politically catastrophic if we move too soon." The implications were too immense, too close to home. Brenda came home late that night, a new, almost brittle energy about her. Her cheeks were flushed, a faint scent of expensive perfume clinging to her. "Celebratory dinner," she announced, tossing her purse onto the hall table. "Grant and the core team. We smashed the fundraising goal this quarter. It's practically a done deal, Dale. He's going to win." I noticed it immediately. A watch, sleek and silver, gleaming on her left wrist. It hadn't been there that morning. "New watch?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She glanced at it, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Oh, a gift. From the campaign. A little thank you for all the long hours, for making it happen." She held her wrist out, admiring it. The watch looked expensive, far more than a typical thank you gift. My world felt like it was tilting, the lines blurring between my job and my life, the personal and the professional, now a painful, tangled mess. The evidence was building, painting a picture I didn't want to see. A cold certainty settled in. I started discreetly monitoring Brenda's activities, not following her, not explicitly, but paying attention to her schedule, her phone calls, the names she dropped. It felt like I was watching a stranger, a person I thought I knew inside out, but who was now moving through a world I barely recognized. I saw her spending more time with Grant Cooper. Their interactions, once purely professional, now carried a different weight, a casual touch on the arm, a shared laugh that lingered too long, a closeness that felt increasingly intimate. The watch was just the beginning. The rain had stopped, leaving the itty air sharp and clean. Mitch and I sat in an unmarked van parked a block from a high-end steakhouse, watching Mr. Davies' black sedan. It was late, past midnight. Davies emerged, flanked by two other men. One was Commissioner Schmidt, unmistakable. The other, taller, with a confident stride and a familiar shock of dark hair, was undoubtedly Grant Cooper. They exchanged handshakes, clapped each other on the back, and then Davies handed Cooper a slender, dark envelope. Cooper tucked it into his inner jacket pocket without a second glance. The entire exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. As Cooper turned to get into his waiting car, a glint of metal caught the streetlight. On his wrist, a watch. Sleek, silver, identical to the one Brenda wore, the one she'd claimed was a thank you from the campaign. My gut churned, a cold, sickening twist. The gifts, the closeness, her evasiveness. It all clicked into place, forming a picture I'd fought against seeing. Back at the apartment, the silence felt heavy, suffocating. Brenda was asleep, her breathing even. My hands were shaking as I opened her laptop. We shared it occasionally for household bills or shared photos. Now it was a tool of investigation. My fingers moved over the trackpad, cold and deliberate. I found them. A series of emails, not just official campaign communications, but personal notes mixed in with strategy documents. Emails between Brenda and Grant. Her tone shifted from professional to something more intimate, filled with casual endearments and shared inside jokes. Then I found the draft of a press release, detailing the future plans for the East Side Community Center. It laid out the groundbreaking ceremony, the projected completion date, all under Grant Cooper's future administration. Attached was a budget that included the $9 million funneled to Sierra Construction, her signature, again, at the bottom of the approval, and then a text message sent late at night from Grant Cooper to Brenda's phone, which she'd left open on the counter. My eyes scanned the screen, the words searing themselves into my brain. Looking forward to our plans after the election, B. It's going to be glorious. Glorious. Not just for the city, I realized. For them, a crushing blow. It felt like a fist to the chest, leaving me breathless. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal, intimate, utterly devastating. The man I was investigating, the man at the heart of the corruption, was also the man my fiancé was building a future with, a future that clearly did not include me. I drove to the station, the city lights blurring through the windshield. Mitch was still there, working late on another file. I walked into his office, the door clicking shut behind me. "She's in deep, Mitch," I said, my voice hoarse, barely my own. "Brenda, my fiancée. She's tied to all of it, to Cooper, to the money." Mitch looked up, his face hardening with concern. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just studied me. "How deep, Dale?" "She signed off on documents, emails, the watch. He wears one too. He sent her a text talking about our plans after the election." I choked out the words, each one a jagged shard. It's not just professional, Mitch. It's personal." His eyes widened, reflecting a shock that mirrored my own. "Damn, Dale, damn. Look, you gotta separate this. You gotta be a cop, not a husband, not a boyfriend. This case, it's huge. You can't let this get in the way." His words were blunt, pragmatic, a splash of cold water. He was right, and it stung. I locked myself in my own office, the fluorescent hum a dull buzz in my ears. I replayed every distant glance, every late night Brenda had spent away, every evasive answer. The initial ultimatum, about climbing the political ladder with her or going separate ways, suddenly took on a brutal new meaning. It wasn't about my career path. It was about making space for Grant, making room for their future, systematically pushing me out. The evidence against Grant Cooper for corruption was solid. We had Davies, we had Schmidt, we had the shell companies, the money trail, Finch's testimony. But Brenda's connection, her direct involvement, complicated everything. It wasn't just a political scandal anymore. It was personal. I faced an agonizing choice: protect Brenda, bury the parts of the investigation that implicated her, or pursue justice, knowing it would shatter my life, and likely hers irrevocably. The image of her face, her ambition, her cold dismissal of my work, warred with the memory of the woman I'd loved. I took a deep, shaky breath. I knew I couldn't ignore the truth, no matter how much it hurt, no matter what it came on. I sat in the dark living room, the city lights painting faint, shifting shadows on the walls. The apartment was cold. I didn't turn on the heat. I wanted to feel it, the chill seeping into my bones, a physical counterpoint to the frozen lump in my chest. Hours passed. My heart felt like a stone, heavy and inert. Brenda's key scraped in the lock around midnight. She walked in, her purse clutched in her hand, her face still carrying the faint flush of a successful evening. A smile lingering at the corners of her lips. The expensive watch gleamed on her wrist. She stopped abruptly when she saw me, silhouetted in the dim light. "Dale, what are you doing into the dark?" Her voice was wary, the lightness gone. I stood up, walked to the coffee table, and laid out the printouts, the text message, the emails, the campaign documents with her signature, the photos of Grant Cooper wearing the identical watch. The stack of evidence against her was small, but each piece was a heavy weight. I know, Brenda, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I know about Grant, and I know about your part in the Westland scheme. She stared at the documents, her face draining of color. Her eyes darted from the papers to my face, then back again. What is this? What are you talking about? Her voice was thin, a practiced denial already forming. Don't, Brenda, I cut her off. Don't lie, it's all here. The watch, the messages, the documents. The campaign isn't just about politics for you two, is it? And it's not just about politics for Grant either. It's about money. Westland money. Her shoulders sagged. The pretense crumbled. She sank onto the sofa, covering her face with her hands, silent sobs shaking her frame. I'm sorry, Dale. About Grant. It just happened. Her voice was muffled. You were never here, always at work, always chasing some ghost. He was different. He understood me, Dale. He saw my potential. Her words were a whisper, wet with tear, but they carried a sharp, familiar blade. My lack of ambition, my long hours, the old arguments, repurposed for a new, devastating betrayal. A surge of white-hot rage unlike anything I'd ever known, coiled in my gut. Years of my life crumbling to dust in front of my eyes. The woman I'd planned a future with, now weeping over another man, justifying her infidelity with my perceived shortcomings. The corruption, Brenda, I forced out, my voice tight. How involved are you with Westland, with the shell companies, with the stolen city funds? She lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed. I helped him with some strategic partnerships, and he called them, and fundraising. He said it was how things got done, Dale, how you had to play the game to win. I just wanted to help him succeed, to help us succeed. Her desperation was raw, but it was tinged with a self-preservation that chilled me to the bone. Strategic partnerships, fundraising, empty words covering a multitude of sins. She wasn't just an unwitting participant, a pawn in Grant Cooper's game. She was actively enabling it, providing cover, lending her credibility, her signature. She knew. Or she chose not to know, which amounted to the same thing. I can't protect you, I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. The law has to run its course, for everyone involved. Her tears dried instantly, replaced by a fierce, icy anger. You'd ruin me. For this? For a chup? Her voice rose, sharp and accusatory. After everything we had? You'd destroy my career, my future? For a case for the mayor's office? There is no us, Brenda, I stated, each word deliberate, final. Not anymore. The trust is gone, shattered. You made your choices. I have to make mine. I turned and walked out, the apartment suddenly too small, too suffocating. I needed air. I needed to clear my head. The streets were quiet, deserted. I walked aimlessly, the cold night wind biting at my face, trying to scrub away the lingering scent of her perfume, the echo of her accusations. My mind was a jumble of shattered memories, broken dreams, and the cold, hard facts of the case. Hours later, Mitch found me sitting on a park bench, staring at the darkened playground. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside me, offering a silent presence, a steady weight in the chaos. He understood. He saw the depth of the pain, the scope of the wreckage. I knew then, with a terrible certainty, that I had to see this through. No matter the personal cost, no matter how much it ripped my life apart. This was bigger than me. This was justice. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Captain Kelly's office felt smaller than usual that morning. I laid out the evidence, piece by careful piece. The shell companies, the bank transfers, Arthur Finch's corroborated testimony, the surveillance photos of Davies, Schmidt, and Cooper. I focused on the clear, irrefutable link between Westland Development, Commissioner Schmidt, and Grant Cooper. I held back on the full extent of Brenda's involvement, not because I intended to protect her, but because the primary targets needed to be secured first. Her name would surface naturally, inevitably, as the investigation unfolded. It's a solid case, Captain, I finished, leaning against the edge of his desk. Bribery, conspiracy, misuse of public funds, millions of dollars all tied to Cooper's campaign. Kelly ran a hand over his thinning hair. He understood the political ramifications. Grant Cooper was leading in the polls just days from the election. This wasn't just a bust, it was a detonation. You're sure, Jensen? Absolutely sure. As sure as I've ever been, Captain. The evidence speaks for itself. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, get the warrants. We move fast. This can't leak. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, logistics, and quiet preparations. Warrants were issued for Westland Development's corporate offices, Commissioner Schmidt's city office, and several key figures' residences. I felt the immense weight of my decision pressing down on me. Each signature I witnessed, each tactical plan I reviewed, brought Brenda's name closer to the surface. It was a cold, hard inevitability. Grant Cooper's campaign was in its final week. Banners hung from streetlights, yard signs sprouted on every lawn, and his face smiled confidently from television screens. He was projected to win by a comfortable margin. The city was buzzing with election fever. My phone rang. Brenda. Her number flashed on the screen, a jarring interruption to the methodical planning. I answered, my voice clipped. Dale, please, don't do this, she pleaded, her voice tight, laced with desperation. Grant, he knows you're looking into things. He said he can make it go away. He'll take care of me. He'll take care of us. Just drop it, Dale, please. Her words hung in the air, a final desperate attempt at manipulation. He'll take care of her. He'll take care of us. The familiar refrain twisted now into a plea for complicity. My duty is to the law, Brenda, I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. Not to personal loyalties. You made your choices. I'm making mine. She started to argue, to plead again, but I hung up. The receiver felt cold in my hand. Her manipulative streak, always present, was now laid bare. Even in this, she tried to control the outcome, to pull me back into her orbit. The raids went off at dawn. Mitch and I led a dozen officers, simultaneously hitting Westland's headquarters and Schmidt's office at City Hall. The chaos was immediate. Startled employees, flashing lights, the methodical search for evidence. At Westland, the team quickly secured Mr. Davies, who was trying to delete files from his computer. We seized hard drives, boxes of documents, and a locked safe in his private office. At City Hall, Commissioner Schmidt was equally unprepared, found frantically shredding papers. In Davies' saying, Mitch found it, a small leather-bound ledger, meticulously kept. Not a company book, but a personal one. It detailed payments, coded entries, and dates. And beside many of the larger entries, explicit names. Grant Cooper, Commissioner Schmidt, other city officials. Exact amounts, dates of receipt, and cryptic notes like East Side Community Corridor or water main extension. The sheer scale of the corruption was staggering, reaching into nearly every major city project for the past 2 years. I stood there holding the ledger, the weight of it heavy in my hands. Grant Cooper didn't just use Brenda for her political skills. He used her as an insider, a trusted link to push through his corrupt agenda. Her ambition, her desire to make a difference had blinded her. She'd been a willing participant, but also in a way, a pawn. The calculated manipulation from Grant, the way he'd ensnared her, then pushed me out, became sickeningly clear. I looked around the bustling, disrupted office, the flashing cameras of the forensic team, the grim faces of my colleagues. This was it. The storm was here. My life, the quiet, orderly existence I'd known, was about to change forever. I braced for impact. The headline screamed from every news outlet: mayoral candidate, implicated in city corruption scandal, authorities raid Westland Development and City Hall. The story broke like a dam, flooding the airwaves and newspaper fronts. It dominated local headlines, the kind of scandal that shook a community to its core, forcing people to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. Grant Cooper, his face pale but still defiant, appeared at an impromptu press conference, denying everything. He called it a political smear, a desperate last-minute attack from his opponents. But the evidence, meticulously leaked to the press by an anonymous source, who I knew was Gary Peterson, was overwhelming. Photos of the seized ledger, detailed accounts of the shell companies, testimony from Arthur Finch, it was all there laid bare for public consumption. Brenda's name surfaced quickly. Initially, she was mentioned as a campaign strategist who had signed off on specific contracts and communications with Westland. But as the investigation deepened and more details emerged, her involvement with Grant Cooper, both professional and personal, became painfully clear. The affair, the gifts, the intimate texts, all of it painted a damning picture. Public outrage boiled over, a mixture of anger at the corruption and a voyeuristic fascination with the personal drama. Internal Affairs called me in. The questioning was thorough, clinical. They wanted to know about my relationship with Brenda, how long we'd been engaged, when it ended, and if I had ever compromised the investigation because of her. I answered honestly, providing the details of our past, of the moment I realized her involvement. I stated the facts, devoid of emotion, making sure nothing I said could be misconstrued as professional misconduct on my part. I knew what I was doing, and I'd done it by the book, no matter the personal cost. Brenda's reputation was shattered. Her political career, the one she'd so fiercely pursued, was over before it truly began. The ambition that had driven her, that had driven a wedge between us, had led her down a path that ended in public disgrace. Grant Cooper's campaign collapsed overnight. The enthusiastic crowds vanished, replaced by angry protesters. His public image, carefully constructed and aggressively marketed, was ruined beyond repair. Days before what was supposed to be his triumphant election, he was facing an indictment. Commissioner Schmidt was arrested at his home, led away in handcuffs. Mr. Davies, looking disheveled and defeated, was taken from his Westland office. The city controller, Gary Peterson, initially a nervous informant, was now lauded as a courageous whistleblower, his face appearing on local news channels, albeit still looking exhausted. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a deep weariness that settled in my bones and a hollow ache of betrayal that refused to dissipate. The clean bust, the meticulous case, had come at a price I was still trying to comprehend. I saw Brenda on TV, her face haggard, eyes swollen. She gave a tearful apology, a carefully worded statement about being misled and naive, about letting her ambition cloud her judgment. It felt too little, too late. The words rang hollow, another performance in a series of calculated moves. She didn't apologize to me, not publicly, not privately, for the infidelity or for her complicity in the scheme. She apologized for being caught. The public, their trust betrayed, felt a collective sense of relief that corruption had finally paid the price. But beneath that, there was also the shock of betrayal within families, within relationships. People saw their own lives reflected in the mess, the difficult choices, the way ambition could corrupt not just institutions, but individuals. The headlines would fade, the arrests would become old news, but the scars for me would linger. The grand jury returned their indictments, swift and uncompromising. Grant Cooper, Commissioner Schmidt, and Mr. Davies. Their names were read aloud, official, damning. Then a pause, and another name, Brenda Hayes, indicted for conspiracy, for her role in enabling the fraud, for knowingly participating in a scheme to defraud the city. The depth of her involvement, once partially shielded, was now fully exposed. I testified a week later. The courtroom was packed, reporters scribbling furiously, cameras flashing outside. I presented the evidence piece by piece, ledger entries, bank statements, surveillance logs. I spoke in a clear, measured tone, detailing the facts, the timelines, the connections. No personal bias, just the professional account. My voice was steady, even when my gaze swept across the room and briefly met Brenda's. She sat at the defense table, her posture rigid, her face pale, devoid of the vibrant ambition I remembered. Her eyes, when they met mine, held a complex mixture of resentment and despair. There was no recognition of shared history, no lingering warmth, just a cold, hard accusation in her stare. It was a brief, brutal exchange, a final severing. The trial was a media circus, tearing apart the city's political fabric piece by painful piece. Every day brought new revelations, new layers of deceit. Grant Cooper, once the golden boy, now sat grim-faced, watching his career and reputation dissolve. The city watched, horrified and fascinated, as its leaders were exposed. The verdicts came down after weeks of testimony. Grant Cooper was convicted on multiple counts of bribery, fraud, and corruption. Commissioner Schmidt and Mr. Davies also faced convictions, their roles in the scheme undeniable. The system, for all its flaws, had worked. Brenda Hayes, facing a similar fate, made a choice. She accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Grant Cooper in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her testimony, carefully orchestrated, confirmed the inner workings of the conspiracy, filling in the gaps that even our extensive investigation hadn't fully uncovered. She traded her former lover for a chance at a future, however diminished. I felt a profound sense of emptiness. The victory, the justice, tasted like ash. It wasn't a celebration, it was the quiet, bitter end of something vast and destructive. I moved out of the apartment I had once shared with Brenda. The process was sterile, efficient, boxes filled with my things, a finality to the years we had spent building a life there. The key was left on the counter, a silent farewell. The city began the slow, arduous process of healing. New interim officials were appointed, committees formed, and trust slowly, painfully rebuilt. But the scars of the scandal ran deep, a constant reminder of how easily power could corrupt. My fellow officers, Captain Kelly, Mitch, they all praised my integrity, my dedication to the case. "You did the right thing, Dale," Mitch said, his hand on my shoulder, his voice low. "The only thing." I knew he was right, but the words felt hollow. I felt isolated, burdened by what I had done, by the choices I had been forced to make. I spent long hours reflecting on the choices everyone had made. Brenda's ambition, Cooper's greed, Davies' conniving, Schmidt's weakness. The ripple effect of ambition and infidelity had destroyed not just careers, but lives. The idea of morality, once a clear line between right and wrong, now felt far more complex, less black and white than I once thought. There were shades of gray, compromises, justifications. The price paid wasn't just legal, it was deeply personal. It affected trust, not just in institutions, but in individuals. It fractured families, shattered relationships, and left a lingering wound on the very fabric of the community. Justice had been served, but the cost was immeasurable. Months turned into a blur of seasons. The headlines faded, replaced by new local dramas and the relentless churn of national news. Life, as it always does, moved on. Grant Cooper, his charisma replaced by a grim pallor, was serving a lengthy prison sentence upstate. Commissioner Schmidt and Mr. Bum,